The wolf stopped walking in the middle of the receiving line, and it would not be moved. Aveline felt it before she saw it, the particular silence that falls over a room when something enormous decides to be still. She had spent 18 years learning the textures of that silence, learning which kind meant danger and which kind meant only that the Alpha King had entered a doorway. This was neither. This was a silence with a question in it. She was standing where she always stood during the quarterly reckoning, against the east wall, ledger tucked against her ribs, 3 steps behind the tally clerks, who did not know her name. She had been counting grain sacks in her head, translating them into columns she would copy out that night, when the enormous grey shape that belonged to the Alpha King of Voreth Hold came to a dead stop 4 feet from her and lowered its head as though it were listening to something under her skin. She did not step back. 18 years of being overlooked had taught her that stillness was safer than flight, and some part of her, the part that pressed crushed silverleaf and ash bark into a paste every morning before the sun cleared the eastern tower, the part that had not missed a single dawn of it since she was 11 years old, understood, with a cold drop in her stomach, exactly what the wolf was doing. It was smelling something it should not have been able to smell. The receiving line held its breath, lords in their formal blacks, the tally clerks with their styluses frozen mid-stroke. Somewhere near the dais, Lady Cressida Marlowe's voice cut off mid-sentence, and even that felt like an event, because Cressida never stopped talking for anyone. The wolf's head came up. Its eyes, pale gold, unnervingly deliberate, found Aveline's face and held there. Then, before anyone in the hall had finished deciding what they were witnessing, it sat, directly in front of her, the way a dog sits when it has found the one thing in a room worth guarding. Nobody moved. Aveline did not breathe. She had built her entire life around not being found, and in the space of 4 seconds, the largest and most dangerous animal in the territory had found her anyway. Her ordinary world before that moment had a shape she had come to trust. She rose before first light in the narrow room above the grain stores and mixed the paste with water carried up the night before, working it into her wrists, her throat, the soft skin behind her ears, until the smell of her own skin disappeared under crushed leaf and bark and something bitter she had never been able to name. She had done this every day for 18 years, since she was a child too young to understand why her mother had knelt her down in the dark and taught her the recipe with shaking hands, and told her never, under any circumstance, to let anyone see her make it. Her mother was gone now, 3 winters gone, and Aveline had kept the ritual the way some people keep prayers, without remembering any more what she was praying against. She kept the ledgers of Voreth Hold's grain stores. It was work no one envied, and work she had made herself excellent at, because excellence was its own kind of invisibility. Nobody questions the woman whose columns always balance. The stores themselves were a world she had built entirely to her own scale. In the 18 years since her mother had brought her here as a child, with nothing but a satchel and a recipe whispered in the dark. She knew which floorboard in the second granary complained underweight, and which did not, which of the tally clerks preferred to be greeted first, and which preferred to be left alone entirely. The precise hour the ovens below sent their heat up through the stone, so that the cold room above the grain stores was, for 1 hour only, almost warm. She had learned the hold the way a person learns a body they will never be permitted to call their own, thoroughly, quietly, without ever once being asked what she thought of it. She ate at the second sitting, slept in the narrow room above the stores, and had long ago stopped expecting anyone in the great hall to know her face. The Alpha King she had seen perhaps a dozen times in 6 years, always at a distance, always surrounded by the machinery of his own authority, commanders, stewards, the low bows of men twice her rank. He had never once looked directly at her. She had assumed reasonably that he never would. Lady Cressida Marlowe stood at the right hand of the Alpha King's council, a widow of good family who had spent a decade making herself indispensable to the running of Voreth Hold, the petitions, the treaties, the careful math of who owed whom what. She was not cruel in the way the old stories told it. She did not need to be. She had built a structure so thorough that cruelty could be delegated entirely to procedure, and procedure never raised its voice. Roderick Halstead, Alpha King of Voreth Hold, was 31 years old and had been ruling since he was 19. He was the kind of large that made doorways look smaller. He had pale grey eyes that people described, when they thought he could not hear them, as unreadable, and a stillness that came from having controlled every visible part of himself since before he had finished growing into his own height. His wolf he had not let off its lead, not truly, not since the year his father died, and grief had nearly cost him the pack, in longer than most of the hall could remember. Until 4 seconds ago, in the middle of the quarterly reckoning, when it had simply walked away from him. The wolf had not tracked a hidden scent through the warded stone of the receiving hall in 240 years. Master Corwin, the Hold's archivist, would say so later, precisely, the way he said everything, not a long time, but 240 years, since the wards were laid down by the last Alpha Queen herself, sealed so thoroughly that not even a bloodline scent should have been able to pass through unless it was recognized by something older than the wall. Aveline did not know any of that yet. She only knew that the wolf was sitting in front of her, patient as stone, and that the man it belonged to was crossing the hall toward her with the particular controlled speed of someone trying very hard not to run. "Move," Roderick said to his own wolf, low, and it did not move. He stopped an arm's length from Aveline. Up close, he was larger than she had let herself register from across a room, broad through the shoulder in a way that made the space around him feel smaller. Dark hair pushed back from his face as though he'd dragged a hand through it and forgotten to finish the gesture. A scar crossed high on his throat, old and silvered. His eyes were on her, not the wolf. "Do I know you?" he said. It was not really a question. "No, my lord." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I keep the grain ledgers." Something moved behind his eyes. Not recognition, not yet, but the specific discomfort of a man encountering a gap in his own knowledge. He looked at his wolf. His wolf looked back at him with an expression that, on a human face, would have been something like triumph. "How long?" he said. "Have you kept them?" 6 years, my lord." "And before that?" She hesitated. 18 years was not an answer she gave people. "I have lived within the hold since I was a child." He studied her the way a man studies a locked door he has just discovered in a house he thought he knew completely. Then, because there was nothing else to be done with a hall full of witnesses and a wolf that would not move, he said, "Continue with the reckoning," turned and walked away, and his wolf, after one long look at her, rose and followed him, though it looked back twice before the doors closed. Aveline stood very still until her hands stopped shaking. Then she picked up her ledger and went back to counting sacks, because that was what she knew how to do when the ground had shifted and there was no map for what came next. She did not sleep that night. She sat at the narrow window above the grain stores, turning the jar of paste over in her hands, the crushed silverleaf gone dark and dry at the bottom, and understood, with the particular dread of someone watching a door she had spent her whole life bracing shut begin, very slowly, to open, that whatever she had been hiding from was no longer contained by a recipe her mother had taught her in the dark. Lady Cressida Marlowe requested a private audience with the Alpha King before the sun was fully up. "A ledger keeper," she said, when he told her what had happened, in the flat and careful voice she used for things she considered beneath her and dangerous in equal measure. "My lord, wolves do strange things. It was likely nothing more than a scent carried in from the stores. spilled grain, vermin, nothing that requires. It did not move for 11 minutes, Roderick said. It has not done that in its life. Cressida's mouth thinned, a fraction, the only tell she ever gave. Then I will have her records reviewed. If there is some irregularity, there is no irregularity in her ledgers. I checked them myself this morning. He had. He did not say why, or that he had stood in the archive at an hour no lord should be awake, reading 6 years of a stranger's handwriting, looking for something he could not name and would not have admitted to looking for. Cressida absorbed this without visible reaction, which was, for those who knew her, the loudest possible reaction. As you say, my lord. She left the audience chamber already composing in her mind the shape of a problem and its solution. Roderick found himself in the East Wing 3 mornings running, on the pretext of inspecting the grain store's accounting, though he had never once in 6 years cared what the grain store's accounting looked like. He told himself this. His wolf, pressing forward under his skin with an insistence he had not felt in a decade, told him something else entirely, and he had begun, uneasily, to suspect his wolf was the more honest of the two of them. On the second morning he found her correcting a miscalculation in the margin of a document another clerk had left on the wrong table, in small, precise handwriting, unsigned. He read the correction 4 times before he understood why it had caught him, not because it was clever, though it was, but because whoever had made it clearly expected no credit and had not bothered to leave any behind. He kept the page. He did not examine closely. Why? On the 3rd morning, he found her in the doorway of the grain store's cold room, sleeves pushed back, kneeling over a lame dog that had wandered in from the yard, one of the low-status pack strays nobody bothered feeding, its back legs swollen and useless. She was binding it with a torn strip of her own underskirt, efficient and unhurried, murmuring something to it that was not quite words. She did not know she was being watched. She did not perform any part of it for an audience, because as far as she knew, there was none. He stood in the doorway longer than he should have, and did not enter. "You," he said finally, when she looked up and found him there, and immediately felt the inadequacy of the word. "My lord." She rose, wiping her hands. The dog stayed where she'd set it, leg bound, watching her rather than him. "How long have you been in the East Wing?" he asked, not because he needed the answer. He already had it from the archive rolls, but because he wanted to hear her say something else to him. Anything else. 6 years, my lord, as I told you. I did not know that. He said it like a confession. I did not know most of what is under my own roof. I am learning. She said nothing to that, because there was nothing safe to say, and for a moment they simply stood in the cold room, with a lame dog between them, and neither of them moved to end it. "Your name," he said. "Aveline." He said it once, quietly, as though testing its weight, and then there was truly nothing left to say, so he left, and did not look back the way his wolf had. He came back 2 nights later than any legitimate errand could explain, and found her still at her table in the archive alcove, the candle burned down to a stub, and her columns long since finished, her head bent not over grain counts, but over Corwin's oldest registry, tracing a name with one finger as though she could feel its weight through the page. "You should be asleep," he said. "So should you." She did not look up immediately. "Your steward tells anyone who asks that you have taken to reviewing border reports at midnight. I do not think he believes it either." "No," he admitted. He crossed to stand beside her, close enough that the candlelight caught the line of his jaw, and looked down at the faded name under her finger without quite reading it. "I came to ask you something, and I find I do not know how to begin it." "Then don't begin it carefully. Just say it." He was quiet long enough that she finally looked up at him, and something in his face, the particular unguarded uncertainty of a man who had not allowed himself to want anything openly in a very long time, made her breath catch. His hand lifted, as though he meant to touch her face the way he had once already, and stopped an inch short, hovering, and for a moment neither of them moved, the whole weight of the unfinished gesture sitting between them like a held breath. Then the door at the far end of the archive opened, and Corwin's voice carried ahead of him. "My lord, if you are down here, I have found the register you asked after." And Roderick's hand dropped, and the moment closed over as quickly as it had opened, leaving only the memory of how close it had come. "Later," he said, low, meaning it as a promise rather than a retreat, and stepped back before the archivist rounded the shelf. She spent the rest of that night with her pulse refusing to settle, turning over the space where his hand had almost been, and did not sleep at all. The pack noticed her before the council did. It began with the lowest-ranked wolves, the ones who ran the outer patrols and rarely came near the great hall, falling in step a half-pace behind her when she crossed the yard, not crowding, simply present, the way an escort behaves without being asked to. Within a fortnight, it had climbed to the pack's mid-ranks, grown men who had served the hold for a decade, lowering their eyes to her in the corridors, as though the wolf's 11 minutes in the receiving hall had rewritten some ledger of standing that only they could read. By the time it reached the loyal beta, Garrett, who found himself bowing his head to her outside the stables and could not entirely explain why he had done it, the Alpha King was the last man in Voreth Hold to understand what his own pack had already decided. "They are treating you as pack," he said to her, half a question, watching Garrett retreat down the corridor with the particular confusion of a man watching his own authority quietly reorganize itself without his permission. "I had noticed," Aveline said. "I did not ask them to." "I know." He said it without complaint. "That is rather the point, I think." She stood there a long while after he had gone, one hand still resting on the dog's shoulder, feeling something in her chest that she recognized, with some alarm, as the specific ache of being seen and not knowing what to do with it. Cressida's first move was procedural, which was the only kind of move she trusted. A formal notice arrived at the grain stores within the week, an audit of all ledger keepers not born within Voreth Hold's registered bloodlines, ordered in the interest of the Hold's fiscal integrity. Aveline's name was on the list of one. "You understand," Cressida said, when she summoned Aveline to a small side chamber off the council hall, all warmth and no comfort, "that this is nothing personal. The Hold has procedures. Procedures exist to protect us all." "I understand, my lady. Your bloodline registration is incomplete." Cressida's eyes moved over her with the specific, assessing patience of a woman recalculating a threat. No father listed. No confirmed origin beyond within the Hold. In ordinary times, this would be a paperwork matter. Given recent events, she did not elaborate on what events, though both of them knew the council feels a more thorough accounting is warranted. It was, Aveline understood, an eviction wearing the clothes of an audit. She had seen the pattern before, applied to others, the slow tightening of paperwork around anyone inconvenient, until the inconvenience simply had nowhere left to stand. She said only, "Of course, my lady," and left with her spine very straight, and did not let herself cry until she was back in the narrow room above the stores, with the door shut. That night, for the first time in 18 years, she did not mix the paste. She told herself it was exhaustion. She told herself it did not matter any more, that the wolf had already found what it had found, and no amount of silverleaf would put it back. She sat at the window, with the dry jar in her lap, and her mother's voice in her memory. "Never let anyone see you make it," and understood, with a grief that surprised her, that she was not only hiding a scent. She had been hiding herself, the whole shape of her, for so long that she had nearly forgotten what she was underneath it. She did not know, sleeping bare-skinned and unmasked for the first time in 18 years, that across the Hold, the Alpha King woke at the same hour from a dream he could not name, certain only that something had shifted, and lay in the dark with his heart going too fast for a man who had not moved. Master Corwin found her 3 days later, bent over the archive's oldest ledgers, cross-referencing bloodline registries, with an intensity that had nothing to do with grain. "You are looking for your mother," he said, not unkindly. Aveline did not deny it. "The audit requires a confirmed origin. I have none to give them." Corwin was older than the Hold's living memory of itself, half past caring for anyone's rank, and he looked at her for a long moment with the particular attention of a man deciding whether to hand someone a weight he was not sure they could carry. 240 years, he said, since the last Alpha Queen sealed the ward wall of this hall with her own blood, so that no scent could pass it unrecognized. I have read the account 100 times, and never understood why she troubled herself with a ward against scent, of all things, until 4 days ago. He turned an old page toward her, brittle at the edges. There was a line of hers, daughters who scattered when the pack fractured after her death, hidden so well the records simply stop. 240 years, and the wall has never once let a hidden scent through, until yours. Aveline stared at the page, a name, faded, that meant nothing to her, and everything at once. "You are telling me I am descended from—" "I am telling you," Corwin said, "that whatever your mother was hiding you from, she was hiding you from something that would have recognized exactly what you are the moment it caught your scent. And it has caught it now." He closed the ledger gently. "The audit will not find a bloodline registration for you in any record from the last 18 years. It will find one, if you let it look far enough back, that no council in this hold can argue with." She carried that ledger, and the weight of the number 240 years, into every hour that followed, like a stone she had not asked to hold. Cressida moved faster than Aveline expected. The council was called within the week, not the full formal reckoning, but a working session, small enough to control, where an audit's findings could be read into record without spectacle. Aveline was summoned to stand before it, and understood, walking in, that this was meant to end quietly, in a room with no witnesses who mattered. She had not expected the Alpha King to be there. She saw him at the head of the table, and something in her chest went very still. Cressida read the findings in her flattest, most reasonable voice. No confirmed bloodline registration prior to Aveline's arrival in the East Wing 6 years past. No father of record, no origin, the Hold's own archives could verify independently. "In the absence of verified standing," Cressida said, "the Council's procedure is clear. She cannot hold a position of financial trust within the Hold without confirmed registration. I recommend her removal, effective immediately, with the Hold's thanks for her service." It was delivered so evenly that for a moment no one in the room reacted at all. Roderick's jaw had gone tight the moment Cressida said "cannot hold," and something under his skin, the same insistence that had walked his wolf across a receiving hall, surged hard enough that his hand closed on the arm of his chair until the wood complained. He did not shift. He wanted to. That was almost worse. The room felt it before he said a word, a stillness gone suddenly dangerous, the particular silence of a man's control fraying at the seams in front of people who had never once seen it fray. 2 of the council members shifted back in their seats without deciding to. "She has kept 6 years of records I could not find a single error in," he said, and his voice was very quiet, which was worse than if he had shouted. "She corrected a document last week and did not sign it because she did not expect to be thanked. You are proposing to remove her from my hold on the strength of a form. My lord, the procedure exists to protect. I know what it exists to protect." He did not look away from Cressida. "I would like to know what you are protecting it from." Into that silence, Aveline set Master Corwin's ledger on the table. She had not planned to speak, but the room was watching her as though she had already left it, and she found, when she opened her mouth, that 18 years of practiced quiet had run out. "My mother hid me," she said. because she was afraid of exactly this moment, a room deciding what I am allowed to be based on a form I cannot fill in. I do not have a confirmed origin, because she made certain no one could trace one. But your archivist has traced it anyway, my lord, back 240 years, to the last woman whose blood sealed the wall of this very hall against scent. I did not walk in here hiding a lack of standing. Her voice did not shake. I walked in here hiding the opposite. She opened the ledger to the page Corwin had shown her and turned it to face the table. The silence that followed was not procedural. Cressida looked at the page, then at Aveline, and for the first time in the whole audience, something that was not composure crossed her face, not defiance. Fear, quick and involuntary, of a woman recalculating exactly how much ground she had just lost. This could be any lineage, Cressida said, too quickly. A name in an old record is not proof of. The wolf is proof, Roderick said. He had not raised his voice, and it silenced the room more completely than if he had. It has not answered to a hidden bloodline in 240 years. It answered to hers in 11 minutes. He stood. The audit is concluded. She remains. Cressida's petition, examined by the full council 3 days later, under Corwin's testimony, was found to rest on procedure applied selectively. The audit ordered for one ledger keeper of many, with incomplete registrations. Chosen, the record would show, within a day of the receiving hall incident. It was not a dramatic unmaking. There was no public execution, no cage, no spectacle for the hall to remember for a generation. There was a formal reprimand, a removal from council standing pending further review, and a woman who left the chamber upright, composed, and considerably diminished, which was, in its own quiet way, worse than anything louder would have been. Aveline did not watch her go. She was looking at Roderick, who was looking back at her with an expression she did not yet have a name for, and for a moment the room and its procedures fell away entirely. That evening he found her in the archive, replacing Corwin's ledger on its shelf, with the particular care of someone handling something that had just changed the shape of her life. "You did not have to say any of that?" he said from the doorway. "No." She did not turn immediately. "But I have spent 18 years being careful with what I let people see. I find I am tired of it." He crossed the room and stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, and for a moment neither of them spoke, because the things that needed saying did not have easy words yet. "I have been in the East Wing 3 mornings running," he said finally, telling myself it was the accounting. "I know." A small, unpracticed smile. "You are not a subtle man, my lord." "No." His hand came up, slow enough that she could have stepped back, and did not. His palm settled against her jaw, tilting her face up, and she leaned into it before she had decided to. "I would like," he said, "to stop pretending it was the accounting." "Then stop," she said. He kissed her forehead, once, careful, like a man keeping a promise he had only just understood he was making. They stood like that a long moment, her hand coming to rest against his chest, feeling the unhurried, steadying beat of his heart under her palm, and it was enough for that hour simply to be 2 people standing quietly together, with nothing left between them to hide. Weeks passed, and then months, and the hold settled into a version of itself that had not fully decided what to make of her, which she found she no longer minded. Some of the older council members still did not know where to look when she entered a room. That, too, was allowed to simply be true without anyone making a spectacle of it. Cressida Marlowe remained within the hold, stripped of her council standing, her petitions now read by others, and her name mentioned less each season, which felt, to Aveline, like the correct kind of ending, not a cage, not a spectacle, only a slow and specific diminishment that asked nothing further of anyone. Her record table had moved, by unremarked stages, into the alcove beside the Alpha King's study. No formal order, only that one day the grain ledgers had migrated there, and no one had thought to migrate them back. The lamed dog she had bound in the cold room had healed crooked but whole, and slept most mornings stretched across her feet while she worked, and Roderick's wolf, who had never fully stopped considering her its particular business, had taken to doing the same on the opposite side of the table, so that she sat most days flanked by two animals who had each, in their own fashion, refused to leave her alone. The jar of silverleaf paste sat empty on the window-sill of her old room above the grain stores. She had not thrown it away. She simply no longer needed what was in it. "The northern grain counts are down again," Roderick told her one morning, dropping into the chair across from her table with the specific, unhurried honesty he had never once used with anyone else in his life, not a report delivered to a ledger-keeper, but the plain, unperformed account of a man telling the person he trusted most what was actually on his mind. "Corwin thinks it's the frost. I think it's Halveth's steward skimming again." "Both, probably," she said, not looking up from her columns. "Probably." He watched her write for a moment, the particular steadiness of her hand that had once, in a receiving hall full of strangers, held perfectly still, while the largest animal in his territory decided the whole shape of both their lives. "Why did you change the shift roster for the East Wing 6 months ago, before any of this?" She looked up, surprised he remembered, or perhaps only now understanding that he had, quietly, for far longer than she'd known. "I didn't think you knew I'd noticed that. I didn't like the idea of you walking back to the stores alone after dark." He said it plainly, the way he now said most things to her. It seemed a small enough thing to fix. That was 6 months before the reckoning. "I am aware of that." She held his gaze a moment longer, something settling quietly into place between them that neither of them needed to name aloud, and then went back to her columns, and he stayed where he was, reading the frost reports upside down and not really reading them at all, and the dog sighed against her feet, and the wolf, across the table, put its head down on its paws and did not move, because for the first time in 240 years there was nothing left in that room worth guarding against. If you had spent 18 years hiding the truest thing about yourself, and the one creature built to find it out did, not through cruelty, but simply by refusing to look away, would you have let it? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Until next time.